Hi everyone, good afternoon and happy Tuesday. It is Sarah Shipton here from Scrapbooking with Sarah, and I'm coming live to you today on Tuesday, April 7 for this week's Technique Tuesday. I want to start by saying I hope you all had a lovely Easter break. We had a 5-day break. We went camping over to Moonta Bay on the Yorke Peninsula, and we had a lovely extended long weekend. It was so nice to get away and have a break, especially after a super busy March. I had my scrapbooking retreat weekend in March, my normal monthly workshops. I went to Brisbane for one of my best friends' 50ths, and then also to Sydney for onstage. So it was a jam-packed March, and I was so happy to take a few days off to have some relaxing extended time with our family and our friends. So I hope you all had a lovely Easter break. You ate lots of chocolate that the Easter Bunny came, and you enjoyed some quality time with your family friends doing the things that bring you joy. And now I know that many of you got some time to do some scrapbooking over the Easter long weekend, because we just finished our week 5 challenge for March. If you are new here, every Monday I post a scrapbooking layout in my Facebook group, Scrapbooking with Sarah Shipton, with the pattern, and I give you the opportunity to recreate that layout using some of your stash that you already have at home or some new Stampin' Up products. And you go into the draw to win free gifted Stampin' rewards. So in the next day or two, I am going to be drawing our lucky winner for March. There were 5 weeks worth of challenges in March, and I can't wait to gift some stamping rewards to the lucky recipient. But for today, let's talk about, this is our first weekly scrapbooking challenge for April. And for the month of April, I am featuring the Exploring Nature Scrapbooking Workshop Kit and the Coordinating Nature Walk Suite Collection. Now, if you have not seen on my social media today, the Exploring Nature Scrapbooking Workshop Kit just came back into stock in Australia. Today, I was signed up for out of stock notifications and got an email that this scrapbooking workshop kit is back. So if you have been sitting and waiting for the notification to pop your order through, or you are joining my April workshops on the 24th and 25th of April, this will be the scrapbooking workshop kit that I will be featuring, and you will be able to order that now to make sure you've got it in time for our April workshops. Today, we are using some leftovers from my scrapbooking workshop kit. Plus, I've also paired it with the Nature Walk Designer Series paper. And I'm going to show you those papers in a little bit more detail today, because I did forget to do it last week. But let's talk about this particular layout. We are converting a single page spread into a double page spread. We are using the pattern 4K, which is on page 62 of the Reflections scrapbook program. This is an old how-to pattern book I had on the shelf, and we are going back to basics, recreating our 12 by 12 inch scrapbooking layouts. This is called Mainframe, and we're doing this quilt block technique where you can cut up squares of your designer series paper, or you can actually use leftovers that you may have from a paper pack or a scrapbooking workshop kit. This is a great pattern to use up your scrap of paper. So I can't wait to share that with you today. So what we're doing is you're going to need 2 sheets of either cardstock or designer series paper to use as your base. I have used the Crumb Cake 2-tone cardstock, and I've used the original side of Crumb Cake. You are also going to need another 2 sheets of cardstock. I've used Very Vanilla here, and you're going to cut these 2 large squares at 9 3/4 by 9 3/4, and that's going to form the base for these little squares of paper, and then your main photo feature in the middle here. Now, to do your little quilt blocks, you are going to need 1, 2, 3, 4 different patterns of designer series paper or cardstock, or you can see here that the artist has actually used photos. So I have used 4 different patterns of paper, but if you are going to use photos with your quilt blocks, you're only going to need 3 different types of designer series paper. So you can see here for the designer series paper, I've used this grid pattern, cloud cover. Actually, no, I think that is, that's not cloud cover. It could be a light pretty peacock actually. So I've used this pattern here. I've also used some plain pecan pie cardstock, and this was actually used as leftovers. So in the scrapbooking workshop kit, the optional featured technique is to spritz and crumple your paper to create this textured paper pattern. Now, I did show the 3 scrapbooking layouts in last week's Technique Tuesday. You can catch up on replay in our Facebook group, or I also post my weekly videos to my YouTube channel, Scrapbooking with Sarah. Now, when I did this spritzing and crumpling technique, I actually had some leftover paper. And so this was a great way for me to cut down these squares. I've used that leftover crumpled paper to put on my scrapbook layout. So what we did, I will just give you a quick heads up on this particular technique. This was plain pecan pie. Here's the before. Plain pecan pie cardstock. And using your Stampin' Spritzer, you can buy these in a 2-pack. Using your Stampin' Spritzer, we actually spritzed the cardstock with water. You only need to get very light spritzing of water over the cardstock because the 2-tone cardstock, the core of the cardstock is actually white. So it's not as thick as the A4 cardstock that you can buy with Stampin' Up. The 2-tone cardstock will have a white core. You'll have the original color on one side, and then you'll have a lighter version of that color on the other side, as you can see here. So you only need to give it a very light spritzing, and then you literally just crumple the paper up, and then you open it up, flatten it out, leave it to dry. It won't take very long to dry if you're just spritzing it lightly. And you can see here what it does is it gives this really fun crumpled leathered sort of look, like maybe an old couch or old rocking chair. It gives this really crumpled, fun leathered look to give that extra texture for your paper. So I have demonstrated this technique at my scrapbooking retreat last month to the ladies that were there. And then of course I had this left over. So I've just cut that down into squares, and I've used that as one of my paper dimensions. I've also used this Mossy Meadow pattern. So, and then I've also used this pecan pie designer series paper. It's actually got some lettering words through that. You can't actually make out the text, but it's got some lettering through that. So this is a really beautiful designer series paper that you can use to give that sort of old world appeal. So they are the 4 different types of designer series paper or cardstock that I have used for my pattern. Now, to get these size squares, you will need to cut them at 1 3/4 by 1 3/4. And because I have done a double page spread, you're going to need 8 of those squares for each of the different papers that you are opting to use. The really cool thing about using designer series paper as well is that if you've only got like a little bit of paper left over, you could cut 8 squares from one side of the designer series paper and then another 8 just using the back of that particular designer series paper. So that's the thing I absolutely love with that extra paper choice there. Okay, so we've talked about the base pages, we've talked about the large square, and then we've just talked about the smaller squares that are going to go over the top. Now, I haven't done any exact measurements. I like to, when I do this type of like quilted or square block patterns, what I typically will do is lay all of the squares out on top of the cardstock, and I will just eyeball them, and then I will make sure that I leave a certain amount of measurement around the outside. So it's probably about 1/8 of an inch around border around here. And then I just spread them out evenly so I've got the same width in between the squares, going both horizontally and then vertically down my layout. So I will typically lay all that out first and then I will stick them down. Now for your grid block on the top here, I've actually added some extra designer series paper here, because if you look at this pattern very closely, it uses one 5.5 by 5.5 inch photo in the middle, and this is how you can see the border of the blue cardstock coming up behind the photo. Now, if you want to do just one 5.5 by 5.5 inch photo to put in the middle as your main frame, then please, by all means, feel free to do that. What I opted to do, because I wanted more photos on my layout, these photos were actually taken in Richmond, in Tasmania, a couple of years ago. I think it was 2021. Oh my gosh, longer than that. There were a lot of, it was obviously during COVID times, and there was initiatives and competitions given for people to travel interstate or within their own state within those COVID restrictions. And I actually won like a 2-night stay in Tasmania. And so a girlfriend and I went to Launceston. We hired a car. We flew in and out of Hobart. We drove north up to Launceston, stayed there, spent some time there. And then on our way back to Hobart, we stopped at this beautiful town called Richmond, which actually has this bridge here is the oldest bridge in Australia. A fun fact for you. So as you can see, these papers go just beautifully with any of your outdoors photos, your travel photos. And so I didn't want just one 5.5 by 5.5 inch photo in the middle. I've actually cut these photos down to 3 by 3 inches. And then to do my square mat, I've cut my paper at 6.25 by 6.25. Or maybe I did it at 6.5 by 6.5 to get that even space border around there. I can't remember actually. I'll have to measure that up. 3 and 3 is 6, and then the 1/4 inch. Yes, this does look like about only 1/8 of an inch. So I think I cut this square at 6.25 by 6.25. If you want a bigger mat, you might want to cut your square at 6.5 by 6.5. And then you'll get a bigger mat that's going to go around your photos. If you're going to recreate the same layout that I have done for 4 3 by 3 inch photos, then cutting that mat will be will be a good opportunity, a good option for you. And then that way I've been able to get 8 photos on my page. And you can see here with this one, I've got a flip flap on here as well. So I've got some extra photos here. I did actually print my photos. I printed them 4 by 6 inch because when I do my weekly scrapbooking challenges, I often don't know what size photos I specifically need. Whereas with the scrapbooking workshop kits, it tells you here, step 1 is actually to gather your photos, and it gives you the specifications of what size and how many photos you're going to need. So when I did this layout here that I needed all these 3 by 3 inch photos for, I actually created my 3 by 3 inch photos in a photo app. It's called Pic Collage. There's another one called Photo Collage. And I could print a 6 by 6 inch photo, and inside there it's going to have 4 of these 3 by 3 inch photos. So it's up to you how you want to do that. But the great thing about if I have just got a whole bunch of, as you can see, random 4 by 6 inch photos here, these were some other ones I had left over from Richmond. I couldn't cut these down to 3 by 3. But you can also just crop your standard 4 by 6 inch photos down. Now I had a couple of extra photos I wanted to get on, so I have here used a flip flap. I might just take that out so you can see that a bit better. I have got a flip flap there on the outside of my memory protector. Okay, so that is all of the paper dimensions for your cutting. Now, a great tip, if you are going to do one large photo mat, you might want to pop your photo mat up using the Stampin' Dimensionals. These are a pack of 300, and they're little dimensional shapes where they are thicker than just your normal adhesive, and you can pop these one in each corner, and then you might need a couple in the middle and then some in the middle here as well. And by doing that, it just helps to lift this larger piece off the top of all the other designer series paper, and it helps it just to stand out a little bit better. So that might be a tip there for you. Now, in terms of the embellishments, if you tuned in for my Technique Tuesday last week, this was actually what I demonstrated. I demonstrated for last week's technique stamping a title on your scrapbook layout, and I actually demonstrated this live, making this particular title, and I said to you guys, you will probably see this pop up in another scrapbooking layout later. So one of the things I love to do is when I'm demonstrating or teaching is then using what I'm demonstrating or teaching in another scrapbooking layout at a later date. So I have stamped this title using the Exploring Nature stamp set. So this is a really cool stamp set which has got large titles on there, perfect for your scrapbooking layouts. I've stamped It's a Great Big World out there, perfect for my travel layouts. And then I also used the Gears and Texture stamp set as well. So last week I actually demonstrated creating these background patterns first. So I've stamped this little splodge stamp set here using the Crumb Cake ink pad. And then this chevron arrow pattern, I've half stamped that off the edge of my box there. This is this stamp here, and I've used Mossy Meadow to do that. And then my large title, It's a Great Big World Out There, I've used Secret Sea, okay? And then I've just distressed the outside of this, my stamped title box, and then I've popped that over the top using, again, those Stampin' Dimensionals just to really help pop that title up on my layout so you can see it a bit better. It stands out much nicer. So that's what I've done to stamp my title. I've also popped some of the streaked dots onto my layout. So these were in the Last Chance product section. Admittedly, I've not checked again since last week to see if they're still here after Easter. But all of this little cluster here, the little journal box and the stickers, these were all left over from my Exploring Nature scrapbooking workshop kit. In fact, I've got the sticker sheet right here. So I've still got some leftover stickers. And I've made a little cluster down the bottom here. And the journal box is numbered. So I've just pointed out some of the places that we visited during our trip to Richmond. You can see I've used the streak dots up here as well. In groups of 3 or 5, typically look better when you're working with embellishment clusters. I've used some of the leftover stickers here as well. And then on this side of the page, I've also used some of the leftover stickers from my scrapbooking workshop kit. So more often than not, you'll have enough left over to put on extra layouts. And then I've purchased a second packet of the designer series paper just on its own. And I'm going to show you all of those beautiful papers shortly. But this one, you could definitely use up scraps from your paper pack. Now, you might have noticed the pattern I've actually traced around the outside of this very vanilla square. This is another fun technique. I'm kind of giving you 3 techniques today instead of the one, but this one here is just creating a border around the outside of your cardstock using your ruler and your fine tip journaling pen. All I've done here is, you want to obviously do this first up. So I popped my very vanilla square on first, and then I put my ruler over the top. I've left that probably about 1/8 of an inch out. And you're just creating this lined border around the outside of your layout. There is a particular name for this and it's escaped me while I think of it. So that is another fun tip there. But today's technique is actually putting this inked pattern around the outside of your cardstock. And I've taught sponging techniques before, but this time you are actually using your entire Classic Stampin' Pads, okay? Now, I don't have a whole sheet of 12 by 12 inch crumb cake cardstock to demonstrate this on today. I'm just waiting for another order. Now, this technique looks quite effective if you are using the coordinating ink pad with the coordinating cardstock. And I'm just trying to remember, this looks quite dark, so I wonder if I have used the pecan pie instead. Let's pop this open, and I'm actually just going to, what you're going to do is you're going to get the entire Classic Stampin' Pad, and you are, oh yep, no, that's much darker, so it was not pecan pie. Let me close this up and I will do the technique now. Isn't that cool? So if you do want that darker look, I would go for another shade, but I have used crumb cake Classic Stampin' Pad with my crumb cake cardstock. So we're going to pop that open, and all you're going to do is get the edge of your ink pad, and you are going to wipe that over the edge of your cardstock. Now you might be thinking, oh my gosh, like that looks a little crazy. But as you can see, when it dries, it does look really cool. Now I tried this another way as well, by actually popping my ink pad down and then actually just pressing my cardstock into it. So that is going to give you a different type of texture to keep in mind, and it depends on how far up you want that to come. So you can see in some instances I've gone probably about a ½ an inch into the cardstock, and then in other instances I've just gone probably about a ¼ inch. So it's entirely up to you how you want to do that particular technique. But the thing to keep in mind with this is it's actually not meant to look perfect. I know some of my customers, you know, they like their scrapbooking to be very precise, and you know, they might get a ruler out to measure everything. And then other times it is just about having a little bit of fun with your products, try new techniques. Now this is not something that I would do all of the time, but as you can see, once the ink dries and settles into the cardstock, it is going to look, give you that textured look, but it won't look as dark as what it looks like now while that ink is still wet. So that is the technique for this week. And if you're going to try it, you want to do that around the outside of your 12 by 12 inch cardstock before you stick any photos down. Yes, I have dropped open ink pads on top of photos. So my tip to you is, if you're going to try this ink pad technique around the outside of your scrapbook layout, to please do that before you stick any of your photos down. Now, I wanted to show you the Exploring Nature Designer Series paper today, because I did forget to share that last week. And so some of this paper you will get in the Scrapbooking Workshop kit. I also bought a second pack of the Designer Series paper. So this is showing you both the front and the back of the papers. Now, this one I have already shown, so I'm going to take these ones out of view. Now, this was leftover paper from my Exploring Nature Scrapbooking Workshop kit. And quite often, if we're going to be using whole sheets of Designer Series paper, I will quite often cut the background out of my Designer Series paper, especially if it's exclusive. And you will know that the paper is exclusive to the Scrapbooking Workshop kit because it will be white on the background, okay? So this is not in the Designer Series paper that you can buy on its own, but I have put it in here all together because it coordinates. So I'm just going to go through and show you the patterns for the Designer Series paper, Exploring Nature. So you've got the Secret Sea Grid paper here and on the back of that. And I love looking at this type of pattern paper. The reason it's called Designer Series paper is that all of our papers are actually designed in-house by artists. So this would have been created, first of all, using paints on a canvas, and then that is transferred into the paper that you girls get to play with your scrapbook layouts. This is a pretty peacock textured paper with a lighter side of that, as you can see here, and it's got this fun grid pattern. Some more pretty peacock Designer Series paper. with some Mossy Meadow and Crumb Cake pattern running through this. I love the designer series paper. You can tell where the artists have used particular tools or techniques in creating the paper. So we've got this green on one side and then a darker Mossy Meadow on the other. And this really beautiful deep blue, which I love. This is Night of Navy, and then just a much lighter version of that, which I absolutely love. And you're going to see me use these blues in some future scrapbooking layouts for the month of April. Now, the other designer series paper pack that I wanted to share with you today was the paper that I used to cut out my mats for the squares here on the inside. So this blue pattern is actually from the Mix-In paper pack. So I have opened one of these. This is the Mix-In Mixed Up Patterns 12 by 12 inch, the Mix-In designer series paper. Now the really cool thing about this Mix-In paper pack is the colors in this paper pack are designed to coordinate with all of the suites that are in the current catalogue. So at the moment, we're still working with the January to April catalogue. And this designer series paper I had left over. So I've actually used this pink on another layout that I shared last month in March. And this is Secret Sea, and it's got this beautiful chevron pattern running through the middle. And I actually used that to bulk up my leftover scraps of the grid paper here. So I just wanted to share these with you. So this would have gone with the Beach Time and the Beach Boardwalk pattern. That's the blue on the opposite side of that. So these patterns are very generic, and they literally will go with any, a combination of the designer series papers and scrapbooking workshop kits that you will find. I love this wood grain one in your current catalogue. So I absolutely love that. And a little tip for you is you want to keep the white sheet that the paper comes shrink wrapped with, because you might pop this aside later in your paper storage and you'll be like, oh, what colors is this coordinate with? It actually outlines the colors that it coordinates with on that packaging. So that is handy for you to hang on to that in case you want to use that at a later time. So I hope that you have enjoyed my Technique Tuesday today. A little shout out to those of you that watched live. I've seen Nicole and Doreen and also Kathy watching live today. So thank you so much, ladies, for joining in live. If you're watching on the replay, have a great week, and I can't wait to see what you come up with for your pattern this week. Thanks for watching, girls. Bye for now.